Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 9 of the Delhi edition. This column evaluates the growing closeness in the India-UK relationship ahead of the upcoming visit of British Prime Minister Boris Johnson to India. Before we look at the key arguments being made by the writers in the column, let us get a brief understanding of the background to the India-UK relationship. See, in general, India and the UK have shared a very close partnership, primarily as a result of their strong historical and colonial ties. Despite a few minor irritants in the relationship during the Cold War, India and UK have really intensified their relationship in the last 20 to 30 years, especially after they upgraded their relationship to the level of strategic partnership in 2004. Over the last 2 decades, the strategic ties between India and UK have grown by leaps and bounds, and most analysts agree that the India-UK relationship is clearly on an upward trajectory. This is clearly evident from the fact that last year both the countries have further elevated their relations by signing the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership in 2021. This agreement lays down a roadmap for India and UK to achieve a set of ambitious goals in this decade. The 2030 Roadmap for India-UK relations outlines the partnership plans for the two countries in various domains, including defense, strategic relations, trade, and as well as close cooperation across the sectors of civil nuclear energy, space cooperation, counter-terrorism and sharing of intelligence, furthering bilateral economic relations with the aim of doubling trade by 2030, along with close collaboration in the field of science and technology, emerging technologies, education, and culture. One of the defining factors of the India-UK relationship is that the United Kingdom is home to a strong Indian diaspora community, which is more than 1.5 million strong, which makes them the single largest visible ethnic minority population in the United Kingdom. This clearly provides for a strong foundation for people-to-people relations between India and UK and helps in cementing the cultural ties by leveraging the soft power between the two countries. On this strong foundation of cultural relations, the two countries are looking to build stronger economic relations and as well as stronger defense, security, and strategic relations. Because in today's world order, both India and UK need each other, as both have their own unique strengths, which complements the national interests of the other country. For example, the rise of India as an economic and military power, especially in the Indo-Pacific region, complements the renewed ambitions of a resurging United Kingdom. This is what provides for strategic convergence in this relationship. And while the UK remains a dominant security actor in Europe, it is increasingly interested in playing a major role in the Indo-Pacific as well. So in this region, India happens to be a natural ally for the UK, where both the countries have common concerns and mutual interests. Under its Indo-Pacific doctrine, known as the Sagar Doctrine, India has been giving utmost priority for the Indo-Pacific in order to counterbalance the rising influence of China. So in the pursuit of this strategic objective, major global powers such as the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, and the others can be strategic partners for India in order to enforce a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific, which is often violated by an aggressive China as it frequently breaches international rules and laws. So as India seeks closer maritime security relations in the Indo-Pacific, countries like UK can play a key role, and they can further strengthen their strategic and defense partnership by scaling up their economic partnership as well. It's in this regard that India and UK are negotiating a free trade agreement, because reaching out to large markets in the Indo-Pacific, such as India, has been a top priority for UK, especially post-Brexit, that is after Britain exited the European Union. So as Britain or UK seeks to play a greater role in the Indo-Pacific, its economic, strategic, and defense interests seem to be aligned with that of India, and this is what forms the core of the bilateral relationship. But despite all these convergences, the war in Europe between Russia and Ukraine has placed India and UK on divergent poles because of their differing positions on the Russia Ukraine conflict. While the UK has firmly sided with the Western countries in targeting Russia and in imposing economic sanctions against Russia, India, on the other hand, has chosen to stay away from criticizing Russia and has largely tried to take a neutral position. This divergent position of the two countries on the Russia Ukraine conflict leads UK to put pressure on India, just like the United States, in order to push India to change its position, as the Western countries are seeking an alignment of all the major democracies against an authoritative Russia. But India has largely stayed away from joining any such democratic alignment against Russia in order to protect its strategic partnership and core national interests with Russia. But apart from this one area of divergence, in almost all the other areas, India and UK are usually on the same page and they even complement their interests. For example, the Indo-Pacific region is one area where India and UK see an opportunity for greater convergence, and this explains why the UK is also interested in joining the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, which has been jointly championed by Australia and India after it was proposed by Prime Minister Modi. Under the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, India and Australia have been focusing on promoting maritime security in the Indo-Pacific, along with economic relations and stability. So now, the UK, which is seeking to play a greater role in the Indo-Pacific, has shown a similar interest in promoting maritime security in the Indo-Pacific. This is where the India-UK defense relationship becomes particularly important, as both the countries perceive a common set of maritime security threats in the Indo-Pacific. This explains the recent military exercises that were carried out between the Indian Navy and the Royal British Navy in the Bay of Bengal. And along with such joint military exercises, India and UK are also looking to promote their defense partnership, especially to promote defense trade between the two countries. They're also interested in establishing a stronger military presence in the Indo-Pacific, primarily to counter the rising influence and aggression of China across the Indo-Pacific. See, just like India and China, even Britain happens to be a major player in the Indo-Pacific Ocean. Because in the Indian Ocean, Britain has an overseas territory known as the British Indian Ocean Territory, which you can see over here in the map. And this small island, known as Diego Garcia, is under the sovereignty of Britain since the colonial days. And post the World War, Britain has leased it to the United States, which maintains a strong military presence at Diego Garcia. So over here, both US and UK have a strong naval presence that allows them to dominate the Indian Ocean. And along with this, Britain has major military facilities in Singapore, Bahrain, Oman, and as well as in Kenya. This complements India's military presence across the Indian Ocean, which includes its frequent naval deployment in the Bay of Bengal, especially in and around the Andaman Nicobar Islands, and as well as the recent access India has gained to the Sabang port of Indonesia, located over here, which allows the Indian Navy to dominate the strategic Strait of Malacca, which is a narrow strategic choke point between the Indian Ocean and South China Sea, on which China is heavily dependent upon. Apart from this, the Indian Navy is proactively deployed in and around Sri Lanka and Maldives, and has even gained access to strategic islands in Seychelles and Mauritius, known as the Assumption Island and Agalega Islands, respectively, where India is building up transport connectivity infrastructure, which could potentially benefit the Indian Armed Forces as well. Then the Indian Navy has also gained access to the Duqm port in Oman, and India has also built the Chabahar port in Iran, located near the Strait of Hormuz. So this strong naval presence of India and Britain across the Indian Ocean helps the two countries to work together to counter the rising military influence of China. China, for example, has developed the strategic Kyoukphu port over here in Myanmar as a part of its China-Myanmar economic corridor that gives China direct access to the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean and allows China to bypass the Strait of Malacca. China has also developed the Gwadar port over here in Pakistan as part of its China-Pakistan economic corridor. This again gives China direct access to the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean, and China has been stepping up its naval military presence across the Indian Ocean. For example, China set up its first foreign military base over here in a small country known as Djibouti, which allows China to exercise influence near the strategic Gulf of Aden and Horn of Africa region, and as well as at the Bab el Mandeb Strait over here. China has also stepped up its diplomatic and military engagement with many East African countries, including Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique. It has even built the strategic Hambantota port in Sri Lanka and has even leased an entire island in Maldives to take up transport connectivity projects. So, as China has stepped up its diplomatic and military influence across the Indian Ocean, countries like India and UK can collaborate and work together with other like-minded countries such as US, Japan, and Australia to counterbalance the rising influence of China. So this is what brings India and UK into a closer strategic, diplomatic, and economic embrace. And this is being reflected in various joint initiatives that the two countries are taking up. For example, apart from focusing on improving their defense trade, the two countries are all set to announce a joint cybersecurity program under which they are planning to conduct joint cybersecurity exercises in order to protect their critical online infrastructure. Through these joint cybersecurity exercises, India and UK are planning to tackle the threat posed by cyber criminals and the threat posed by cyber warfare in order to secure their critical information infrastructure. That during the upcoming visit of Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the two countries are also planning to hold their first ever strategic technology dialogue to focus on emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, robotics, 5G networks, etc. And they plan to hold a regular ministerial level dialogue for this purpose. They're also further expanding their cooperation in the areas of renewable energy and climate partnership. And after India and UK announced the Climate Partnership Initiative during the recently concluded Glasgow Climate Change Convention in November 2021, UK has agreed to invest £70 million in India through its British International Investment Fund in order to support the creation of renewable energy projects in India, such as solar power projects. It is in this context that the proposed free trade agreement acquires a lot of significance, as it provides a great opportunity for India and UK to double their bilateral trade by 2030 and to venture out into new areas of cooperation. Both the countries are already major trading partners of each other, and they also happen to be major investors in each other's country. So they are looking to scale up their economic engagement through this free trade agreement, and India is seeking greater market access into UK, along with duty concession for several of its exports, especially for labor-intensive industries such as agriculture, pharma, fisheries, and MSME sector. The UK is also very eager to expand its market access in India in order to capitalize on the massive market size of India. So all in all, India and UK are witnessing a unique moment in their bilateral relationship, and the writers conclude that the relationship is clearly on an upward trajectory, considering the common areas of cooperation between the two countries. Now let's take a look at this column from page number 10, which carries out a critical evaluation of the amendment that has been proposed to the WMD Act, or the Weapons of Mass Destruction Act. See, a WMD, or a weapon of mass destruction, is defined as any nuclear, radiological, chemical, or biological weapon, or any other device or weapon which has the capacity to cause death and destruction on a massive scale. So such weapon systems, payloads, and delivery systems are collectively referred to as WMDs, or weapons of mass destruction. This includes nuclear bombs, missiles, chemical and biological agents that could be turned into weapons, and all these weapons have the capacity to inflict massive destruction, causing enormous and unspeakable damage to both human life and property. Such highly destructive weapons are classified as WMDs, and their production, proliferation, and exports are strictly regulated under few international laws and resolutions, which have to be enforced and implemented by every country through their domestic laws and national legislations. So to fulfill this international commitment, India had introduced the WMD and their delivery systems Prohibition of Unlawful Activities Act in 2005, which prohibits the unlawful manufacture, transport, or transfer of WMDs, along with their means of delivery. This law has been sought to be amended by the government recently, and on the 5th of April 2022, an amendment bill was tabled in the Parliament. The WMD and their delivery systems Amendment Bill 2022 was introduced in the Lok Sabha and was also passed the next day. The recent amendment introduced by the government seeks to extend the scope of banned activities to cover financing the development, manufacture, transport, and transfer of WMDs, especially by non-state actors such as terrorist organizations. This amendment bill has been introduced by India because there is a need to amend the law in order to specifically target the financing of the proliferation of these WMDs, in order to enable India to completely fulfill its international obligations. If you look at the statement of objectives and reasons of the bill, it states that in recent times, regulations relating to the proliferation of WMDs and their delivery systems by international organizations have expanded, and hence there is a need to incorporate them into Indian law. It is an urgent requirement for India to update its law to bring it in line with the UN Security Council's financial sanctions against WMDs, and also the regulations on money laundering and terrorist financing as brought out by the FATF or the Financial Action Task Force. So to update and synchronize India's laws on WMDs with UNSC resolutions and with the standards of FATF, this amendment was necessary. See, when the original WMD Act was introduced by India in 2005, the purpose was to ensure that India fulfills its international obligation to UNSC Resolution number 1540 of 2004. In line with the commitments of this resolution, India introduced the law in 2005 to cover all types of WMDs and delivery systems, along with providing for stringent penalties and punishment for the violators. The law provides for a minimum imprisonment of 5 years for any violations, thus helping India prevent non-state actors from developing, procuring, and transporting WMDs. This resolution of the UNSC was introduced in 2004 to specifically target the growing threat of non-state actors, that is, terrorist organizations, who were seeking to gain access to WMD material and technologies. So, to tackle this threat posed by terror outfits, the UNSC adopted Resolution 1540, which provides for legally binding obligations on all UN member states as per the provisions of Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. As per the resolution, the UN member states are obligated to bring out a national law that prevents the proliferation of WMD materials and technologies, and especially prevents them from falling into the hands of non-state actors. So as per UNSC Resolution 1540, the UN member states have three primary obligations. First, no UN member state should provide for any form of support to non-state actors which are seeking to acquire WMDs and related materials and technologies. 2. All the UN member states have to adopt and enforce laws criminalizing the possession and acquisition of such weapons by terrorist outfits. And 3. They have to adopt and enforce domestic controls over any material or technology which can be used in the design and development of WMDs. So accordingly, India had enacted the WMD Act in 2005. And now, to stay up to date with these international obligations, India has introduced an amendment to synchronize the Indian law with UNSC resolutions and FATF standards. The new amendment expands the scope and the coverage of the Act and includes the prohibition of financing of any such activity related to WMDs and their delivery systems. The amendment specifically focuses on targeting the financing routes and provides the central government and the central security agencies the power and authority to freeze, seize, or attach funds and even other financial assets and economic resources which are suspected to be used by individuals and non-state actors to fund the development of WMDs. It also prohibits individuals from providing for any such finances or related services to other persons or to organizations which are indulging in such activity. So this amendment in the Indian context became necessary because UNSC resolutions are frequently updated And after UNSC Resolution 1540 underwent a periodic review, its standards have been upgraded and there is a need for India to catch up with the international standards. In one such review, which was taken up in 2016, the UNSC came to the conclusion that the risk of proliferation or the leakage of WMDs into the hands of non-state actors is increasing due to the rapid advances that are taking place in science and technology, and as well as due to the new developments that are taking place in the world of international finance and commerce. Today, with the advent of digital currencies and cryptocurrencies, it has become much easier for non-state actors to move around their financial resources. And also the advent of science and technology has made it easier for even a terrorist outfit to develop and procure WMDs. So to account for these changes, the UNSC resolution was upgraded, thus making the amendment necessary to the Indian law. So the amendment being introduced by India to the WMD Act specifically addresses two gaps in the existing legislation, and it focuses on inculcating the anti-terrorist financing standards laid down by FATF in order to place tighter controls over the financing of WMD activity. Then second, the amendment takes into account the new developments in technology, particularly the development of drones and unauthorized work in biomedical labs, which could be potentially misused to create bioweapons. Drones have made it easier to proliferate and even to deploy WMDs such as chemical agents and biological agents. So these new technological developments are being covered under the ambit of the new amendment, along with covering new routes of terror financing in order to curb terror funding that could result in the development of WMDs. Since India happens to be a very responsible country with regard to non-proliferation, it has proactively taken these steps to introduce an amendment to the WMD Act. And apart from this, India could further take forward its efforts to work with other countries to ensure that WMDs do not fall into the hands of terror organizations. See, India has already tightly regulated the export of such sensitive materials and technologies. And with the new amendment, India will not only be fulfilling its responsibilities to the international community, but will also expect the same commitment and cooperation from the other countries as well. This is particularly important for India, considering that India's neighbors, such as Pakistan, are known to fund and sponsor terrorist outfits, many of which have a desire to procure WMDs. So through such proactive amendments, India is not only setting the right example for the other countries, but can also help the other countries to scale up their national laws, their institutions and regulatory framework in order to strictly enforce and implement the global non-proliferation standards. It will also promote India's cooperation with international institutions such as the IAEA or the International Atomic Energy Agency, and India can be at the forefront of these efforts to prevent the proliferation of WMDs, especially to prevent the falling of these weapons into the hands of terrorist outfits. But however, when the amendment bill was introduced in the parliament, the opposition parties had one concern. Their concern was, since the amendment is providing for a very broad provision, and since it targets any individual who is involved in such financing activity, the opposition parties had a concern that what if the law enables the targeting of people on the account of mistaken identity? What if the wrong people are accused of being involved in such financing activity, which could in turn result in the violation of rights of these people? So opposition MPs in the parliament expressed this concern that whether the new law could result in the targeting of innocents. And to this concern, the foreign minister who tabled the bill replied that there are enough checks and balances in the law to prevent any such misuse, and the chances of people being targeted on the account of mistaken identity happens to be very minimal, because in the process of identifying these institutions and individuals who are involved in financing WMDs is comprehensive and well defined under the law. Now let's take a look at this column from page number 8, which evaluates the role of MSME sector in the Indian economy and how the sector has been hit by the pandemic. See, the MSME sector, or the medium, small and micro enterprises, play a critical role in the Indian economy. There are millions of MSME industries in India, and collectively they contribute nearly 30% to India's GDP. They account for nearly 40% of India's exports. And apart from generating millions of jobs, they also account for 6.1% of GDP from the manufacturing sector, and they account for nearly 24.6% of the GDP from the services sector. So, without a doubt, the MSME sector is critical for the Indian economy. But these MSME enterprises face several challenges, primarily due to the small size of their operations and due to their vulnerability to shocks and uncertainties. And there can be no bigger shock than the pandemic, and the uncertainty introduced by the lockdowns in India and around the world disrupted the supply chains and even eroded demand overnight, thus triggering an existential crisis for most of the MSME industries. Between 2020 and 21, most MSME firms have reported a more than 50% decline in their turnover and as well as in their profits, thus threatening the very survival of these companies. This was a direct result of the falling demand and as well as the disruption caused in the supply chain, and the slow recovery followed by subsequent waves of the pandemic has hit the very core foundation of the MSME sector. So, in this context, the government, along with the RBI, came out with few schemes and initiatives to support and help out the MSME sector, but these have been found to be insufficient. It is in this context that the writers are arguing that along with suitable government policies, the MSME industry requires a financial safety net in order to make the sector resilient to withstand such shock events and uncertainties. They argue that limited piecemeal support from the government will not help MSME sector in the long term. Instead, they make a case for a dedicated financial safety net to support the MSME industry during such times of crisis. They propose the idea of a small business insurance scheme on the lines of crop insurance scheme to provide for financial cover to small businesses and companies during such times of crisis. They call upon the government to provide for budgetary support for establishing a dedicated fund for the MSME sector, and they call it the Uncertainty Corpus Fund for Small Businesses. So, if the government can put in place such a dedicated corpus along with an exclusive insurance scheme for small businesses, they could act as financial safety nets for the MSME sector, and this, accompanied with government policies and initiatives, can help in shielding this critical sector from any such shock events and uncertainties. Next, in this column on page number 9, the writer examines the dismal state of online education in India. Even as online education has gained more traction and popularity in schools, there exists a huge divide in India's online education system, which has been clearly highlighted by the disruption caused to the education sector by the pandemic. In this column, the writer relies upon the data offered by the ASER report, or the Annual Status of Education Reports, which is an authoritative report on the status of education in India. By using the reports for 2020 and 2021, the writer argues that even though the adoption of online education went up during the pandemic, there still exists a huge gap or a divide among students when it comes to accessing online education as a result of limited access to the technology, income divide in the country, and gender disparity in the country. The lack of sufficient access to all students to the tools and technology of online learning, such as internet, mobile phones, etc., has deprived millions of students from accessing the benefits of online education. This digital divide happens to be a direct result of the income divide, and here you can notice a clear rural-urban divide as well when it comes to students accessing online education. This divide further expands on the lines of gender as well, as girl students find it more challenging to access online tools of education. So, by bringing out these divides in the adoption of online education, the writer paints a picture of the state of adolescent education and learning in the country. Now, coming to the last topic, let's take a look at this article from page number 10. See, recently, the Higher Education Department of the Government of Karnataka issued a couple of orders with regard to the implementation of the National Education Policy 2020 in undergraduate courses. In these orders, the government declared that learning the Kannada language would be compulsory and mandatory for undergraduate courses such as BA, BSc, BCom in the academic year 2021-22. So this mandatory language provision in the name of implementing the National Education Policy 2020 was immediately challenged at the High Court. And following this, the Karnataka High Court has issued a stay order from implementing these directives of the Education Department. So in this context, it becomes important to examine whether any language can be prescribed as a mandatory language under the NEP 2020. See, the National Education Policy 2020 is seen as a reformative and transformative approach towards education as it provides for a choice-based system. The NEP lays a lot of importance on inclusive education, and in line with these principles, the central government has clarified that NEP 2020 does not provide for mandatory or compulsory learning of any language. So the litigants who had filed a petition against these orders of the Karnataka government argued that forcing students from outside the state and students from foreign countries to learn a compulsory language goes against their basic fundamental rights and constitutional rights. And also, it is not in line with the spirit and principles and values of the national education policy. Now let's take a look at the mains practice questions. The first question: despite the challenge posed by the Ukraine crisis, the India-UK relationship has been on an upward trajectory. Evaluate with focus on their priorities in the Indo-Pacific region. The second question: critically examine the WMD and their delivery system's Prohibition of Unlawful Activities Amendment Bill 2020. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which the link has been given in the description box below. So this brings our discussion to an end, and if you found the initiative to be helpful, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching.